Welcome to the Inside Silverstone podcast, a business-focused podcast covering all things tech, engineering and innovation. Hosted by me, Chris Broome, a huge tech, motorsport and gaming fan, and also the owner of Longhurst, a firm of lifestyle financial planners and independent financial advisors located in Silverstone, Northamptonshire. This is a series of unscripted and unpolished conversations with leading business owners, thought leaders and high-tech talent where we discuss their experiences within the Silverstone business and motorsport region. We will also be asking them to share their knowledge, insight and their thoughts on the future just for you. If you're looking to learn more about the Silverstone high growth region and commercially connect with like-minded peers, you've definitely come to the right place. Welcome to Inside Silverstone. Good morning and welcome to the next edition of the Inside Silverstone podcast. My name's Chris Broome, your host, and today I am delighted to introduce to you Jean-Philippe Launberg. Jean, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming on. As we've discussed, this is a sort of new community podcast for the Silverstone region. But again, Jean, thank you so much for coming on. Before we get into the main bulk of the interview, I'd love to just quickly run through your CV and your background for the benefit of our listeners, just so that they can understand why I thought you'd be a fantastic guest on the podcast. So is that okay if I go through that?
That's quite fine.
Okay, cool. So basically, I obtained all of this from LinkedIn and Google, as I do with everybody that comes on the show. I started handwriting all of your notes, but realised that you've had such an extensive and knowledge-fueled career that I better print it off LinkedIn, which is what I've done. So I've got a few pieces of paper in front of me. So let's start with education. So education began with a bachelor's degree of engineering from the University Centre of FEI, which is Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Exactly.
You then, in the sort of middle to late part of the 90s, did some extension courses in project management and industrial administration from the University of Sao Paulo and also the University of California, Berkeley in the US.
It's a great place to go.
I'm sure. We'll talk about that in due course. And then you also, for fun, thought you'd finish and get a Masters of Business Administration and Management from Rutgers, which is the State University of New Jersey in the US also.
Yes, though it was actually in Shanghai.
Oh, was it really?
Yes, so we'll talk about it more.
Wow.
It was a program from Rutgers, but they flew the professors over to Shanghai and Beijing, and it was the only way to get a master's, I guess, at that time.
Amazing.
But it was an interesting experience as well.
Amazing. And so the Shanghai statement obviously then rolls into the career, which, as I said, is from an automotive and engineering and a vehicle perspective, for me anyway, and for my own personal learning, super impressive. And so there's too much to obviously go through, but basically the nuts and bolts are that your sort of international trainee development as an engineer and within automotive began at Ford Motor Company, then went to BMW, and then went to Volkswagen, across sort of the US, Germany, and then back to Brazil.
Yes.
You've then worked across multiple countries, including Brazil, Korea, China,
Italy.
Germany, Italy, and obviously the UK, which is where we are now, where you've worked with General Motors. You've done some freelance work. You've worked for Eurobahn Brazil. You've worked for Shanghai Eastone Automotive Technologies. You have worked for Shanghai General Motors, Jinbei General Motors, Fiat, General Motors China, and then most recently, AutoStrat Consulting, which is your own business, which we'll come on to in due course. What I'm sensing from this and from the experiences that I've read is that you've had a very extensive career over nearly 2 decades in automotive across multiple countries, multiple cultures, multiple languages, and now you're in the UK providing all of this knowledge within your own consultancy business.
That's the intent of AutoStrat.
Wow. And so from a language perspective, how many languages do you speak?
Well, properly only one, which is Portuguese.
Okay, of course.
To a certain degree of proficiency, I would say English, Spanish. I'm married to an Argentinian, which brings some interesting football association.
Yes, very much.
And I speak Italian because that was the only way to communicate when I lived in Italy. I learned about that the first week. There was no other way. So I said, okay, I'll just learn the language. And it stayed with me for 16, 17 years. I had many chances to go back to Italy the last 2 years, and it still works as a language. It's good enough.
And to be fair, your English as a second, third, fifth, sixth language, whatever it is very, very good. And I know that you were conscious prior to doing the podcast that there may be language issues, but I don't think us and the listeners are going to have any issues with that. So thank you. And as I said, and feedback to the listeners, as you can tell, having Jean on for me was important because knowledge is power, and the purpose of the podcast is to ensure that we sort of pass that wisdom to the listeners as quickly and and for free, which is the purpose of the podcast. So thank you, Jean, for being on. So let's talk about your consultancy business, AutoStrat Europe. So for the benefit of the listeners, what do you do? How do you add value to the lives and the businesses that you work alongside? And the journey that you've been on to date and sort of hopes for the future. What's the story?
Okay. Well, I think basically I love automotive, and that's all that I wanted to do and work with since I was a boy. I started out as an engineer, as you pointed out, but gradually I noticed that I could actually link the engineering and the business strategy side fairly well and understand what the business needs to go to, what are the markets like, and how does it drive what we do inside of any automotive company, and then how to translate that into the engineers to get a product developed, or the marketeers to get into a new market and reach the specific customer segment.
Okay.
So after a long time working for very, very large companies, as you have pointed out, I like to make changes in my life, whether it's location, language, or else. I decided that I needed to try something different, get a break from the massive corporations. So one way was to provide that knowledge to companies, small companies, which are very nimble, agile, but a lot of times do not have the experience or the exposure in the past to be able to link up that strategy with what they do best, so they can develop their way forwards, either developing a new product or expanding into a new market, or even communicating with a client or a customer of very different culture.
Okay.
So I thought I would actually be able to share that and add value to smaller companies, help achieve their potential through those services and knowledge. And for me, is also learning, because I was very much interested in understanding how those small companies operate.
Yes.
Which is very different from what I had been exposed the previous 20 years. And I'm already achieving those targets. So we're making good progress.
And so the companies that you currently support at the moment and work with, are they just UK based, or are some of those in other countries around the world?
At the moment, I have two clients. One of them is UK based, is actually located in the Silverstone Park.
Fantastic. Okay.
It's a very, very nice, agile company, very expert in what he does. I have a second client, which is a Chinese company, which wants to develop new technology, new uses for its products, because it thinks it will not be able to still generate reasonable margins in 5 years' time doing what they do. Okay. And I've convinced them to do the work, the R&D work, and the strategy work in the UK using UK resources. So I use companies in the Silverstone Park or the Silverstone cluster as most as I can. So I brought them over here and help this business structure to support them achieving their targets.
Okay, so you're using the skill sets within the Silverstone Technology Cluster and the businesses within Silverstone Park to help support international business from a client that you're working with. Which is great, and proof of concept that the community here within Silverstone is actually working and connecting the dots. And what's your hopes for the future of AutoStrat? You know, the business is a couple of years old. You like to be nimble and to pivot and learn. You know, what do you hope to sort of achieve? Are you looking for more businesses to work alongside, or what's the sort of journey do you think for the firm?
Yeah, well, the business is actually 2.5 years old.
Sure.
It started out in Brazil.
Okay,
so there's an AutoStrat in Sao Paulo, and there's an AutoStrat Europe in England.
Understood. Okay.
And when I started providing consulting services, my first client was a Chinese OEM.
Okay.
And commuting from Sao Paulo to Shanghai twice a month started to get really, really tiring.
Yes.
And I was usually, I couldn't just do it. So I started to be away for 5-6 weeks at a time and not going home at all, which was not the nicest, especially as I have a young son. So I decided to move to England while still taking care of that client, which was a full-time client.
Yes.
And also help them do some business in England.
Yes.
And when that project finished, I decided to open up a local entity and provide similar services to local UK companies.
Fantastic.
So that's when AutoStrat Europe came about, which was about 5 months ago.
Wow. Okay, fine. So the Brazil entity's been in existence for a while, successful, working with international companies. You've located yourself and your family, which we'll come on to in due course, to the UK to then provide, you know, your specialism and your niche and your expertise to the local businesses within sort of Silverstone Park and the local business community.
Yes.
Fantastic. And so, are there, you know, from your own perspective, any interesting projects or ideas that sort of interest you? So, you know, there's clearly a lot of talk at the moment regarding you know, the future of electric vehicles and also sort of driverless vehicles. Do you have any opinion on that? And really anything else that's of interest to you at the moment that might be of use to the listeners?
Yeah, well, I'm fully dedicated to electric vehicles for the last 2.5 years since I started AutoStrat.
Okay.
And I do believe that's the way forward. And it doesn't have to be, but there's actually more than one type of electric vehicle. And so we can have variations which suit customers and markets better. Okay. So we're going to coexist with a few solutions.
So just on that point there, just for my purpose, educate me on that. So what are the different types of electric vehicles? So what in general?
Yeah, not a problem. Well, electric vehicles are basically those that are driven electrically to start with.
Sure.
A lot of times we think that all electric vehicles need to be plugged in to a plug as the only source of energy.
Okay.
And I think it's great for a lot of the users, especially if you live if your commute is not very long, and if you have, you know, good availability of charging spaces at work or wherever you spend your days, and then at home. But if you are in China and you have a single car per household, and that vehicle needs to be able to do 500 kilometers on short notice, and you don't have a garage, so you park on the street, and your charging availability depends on when you parked, where you parked. It's a different story. So I believe that, for instance, range extended electric vehicles, those that actually have a sizable battery, but also have onboard means of generating electricity from petrol or diesel when you need it a few times. It seems to be one of the most optimized solutions I can see for the next 10, 15 years.
Sure. And obviously the large manufacturers are all getting involved in this. So I remember seeing something from Volvo saying that by a certain date, all of their sort of future manufacturing will be electric only. and the likes of obviously BMW, Volkswagen, and the other big players. Do you think there's the opportunity for smaller, currently unknown manufacturers to come into the market who have extensive knowledge and specialism within this space, potentially with deep pockets, to be able to come in and offer a variation to the likes of BMW and some of the other bigger brands? Certainly,
there's absolutely no doubt. When Volvo and BMW and others say they're going to be electrified from 2025 onwards,
sure,
that means they will have full electric vehicles, but they will also have hybrid vehicles.
Yes.
Plug-in hybrid vehicles. So they're not committed yet to a full electric powertrains or fully electric-driven vehicles yet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a change, there's a shift in technology from what drives the vehicle, but it impacts how the vehicle is designed as well, substantially. So you can derive a lot of other benefits from a full electric vehicle that you can't with a traditional vehicle, from a space availability.
Okay.
Plus integration of that vehicle with the outside world in a more connected way as well.
Its environment, yeah.
In the last 5 years, we have seen more than 30 new automakers around the world, more than the previous 100 years.
Wow. Okay.
So that's a nice, statistic. And I've been collecting the names of new automakers. Some of them will not be here in the next 20 years or so.
Sure.
Some of them will.
Yeah.
I remember seeing Geely, or Geely, depends on how you pronounce it, which when I lived in China 10, 15 years ago, it used to be less developed than a kit car. We would actually go to the dealerships and laugh and say, how can anybody buy anything like this? And look where they are today. Really world-class quality vehicles. They own Volvo, from which they get a lot of support as well. They've just purchased Lotus recently, a few months ago.
Sure.
And they're turning out to be one of the biggest and most profitable automakers in the world. And they are quite well in the journey. Oh, they own London Electric Vehicle Company, which is the old London Taxi Company.
Yeah.
Which just came up with a very, very nice, interesting taxi, which if you go to London, you have a chance to ride in. So it's amazing how the shift into electrification also enabled many new companies which were not in the automotive sector to have a really good try, and some of them will be successful.
Yeah, it's fantastic and it's exciting. The whole sort of tech and high growth region, full stop, nationally and globally is beyond exciting. And I think the shift from sort of fossil fuels into more eco-friendly and sustainable methods is great, and sort of more power to it. And you mentioned Lotus, who also, I think they recently moved on to Silverstone Park as well, which is fantastic to sit alongside obviously other car manufacturers. So again, it's exciting for the region. In relation to Silverstone Park and Silverstone Technology Cluster, so you are also a technology cluster member alongside my firm Longhurst, which is fantastic. When did you join the cluster? Is that something fairly recent?
I joined the cluster when I founded AutoStrat Europe.
Okay.
So earlier in the year.
Great.
I actually spoke to Pim, and who handles or manages the cluster.
Indeed.
And I said, you've been my first invoice, my first expense has been to you, because it's a really nice community. And being in the cluster it makes me feel part of an extended family.
Yes.
With lots of brothers and cousins. And when I need to, get information or learn about something, or even, investigate if someone is interested on something I may be able to help with, I use that community as a primary base of operations, let's put it like this.
Yeah, it's a fantastic community. You're right. We're relatively new. Longhurst is relatively new into the cluster, but already feel the family connections. That's a great analogy that you've used. And with Pim, who was our first interview on here also, his expertise and his own experience within automotive and tech and engineering, brings a natural passion as a leader of the cluster to then be able to connect the dots between all of our businesses. And also the founding partners of the cluster, which includes the likes of EMW, Grant Thornton, and Barclays as a bank. And so our connection, our introduction, John, came from Barclays through our mutual banking manager, Matt Lawley. So Matt, if you're listening to this, thank you for the introduction. It's very kind and it's been successful. In relation to Silverstone Park, so your business, and this is important for the listeners to understand, so your business provides services in, and you're part of the cluster, and you work with the firm on site, which is great, and you're helping to connect other businesses, or another business at the moment, but hopefully more, into the park to help increase commerciality and success. But you're not actually yourself positioned on the park, and I think this is important and something that I mentioned and we discussed with Pim in the first interview, so that for the listeners that are thinking, well, we actually need to potentially move and uproot to come into Silverstone Park to be part of the cluster, that's actually not the case. How have you found that? Have you been tempted to potentially, because you live obviously in Buckingham, which we will come on to in due course, have you considered potentially taking an office here, or do you just think, actually, I don't need to do that at the moment, we can remain nimble, which is a word you used earlier. I work out of obviously a local firm here, so you can obviously be based on site. Do you feel the need to have to come in here, or do you think actually the family and the network is strong enough that actually you can grow and be successful without having to do that?
Well, for my type of business, I think the family and the network is strong enough. I spend time where my core clients are.
Yes.
So since I have a client in the park today, I'm here 3 to 4 days a week.
Great.
And it's a nice enough client that even says, if you need to support a second client or the third client, and you want to use my offices, you're welcome to, because we'll give you an office anyway.
Right.
So I come here typically 4 days out of 5 a week. So sometimes I have to obviously go travel someplace, or in the UK or outside the UK. But I think of it as actually my base. Yeah. Whether it's formally or not my base, in my heart it's my base.
Good.
For the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So I count myself as an occupier or a member of the park in any way. So they all know me. The security guys know who Jean is, and even though I don't have a formal address, they even give me the passes to come on race days and be able to come in and park whatever I want and go to business around here. So I feel at home.
Yeah, which is great. And I said to you before we even started the podcast, I also feel a natural affinity here when I turn up to the office for my client meetings and to obviously run Longhurst. I get out of the car and I can hear the cars, the race cars, whizzing around the track, and it's a natural smile lands on your face, and then you come into the office and the reception team downstairs, and this is the innovation centre we're talking about. The whole feel of the community is one of togetherness. Yeah, totally agree with that. For our listeners and the business owners that are not part of Silverstone Park at the moment and not part of the technology cluster, but they have a niche and an expertise in sort of tech and engineering, in one sentence, if we could think about this, what would you say to them to sort of encourage them to either come here or to start working commercially with the businesses on site? How would you encourage them?
In one sentence?
If you could, I know. One long sentence, maybe.
Well, if you need to get something done, which is technology-oriented, in a very creative way, in an efficient way, and probably much faster than you would actually get done someplace else, come to Silverstone.
Boom, there it is.
And it doesn't have to be automotive-related. There's a lot of companies here that I actually got to know in the past few months or past year, which are not automotive related at all, but they provide services or they have technologies and products which are tech based. And you will be surprised. I mean, there's a lot of sometimes preconception that because the automotive side, it's part of the Silverstone history, that we all think it's all automotive, and it's not. There are many companies which have absolutely nothing to do with automotive here. But it's a nice environment.
Yeah.
It's a nice environment. You get different expertise. You get access to people. It's easy to get in and out, whether you're commuting or if you have to go to the airport. And the extended supply chain around Silverstone in the Midlands, it's really good.
Yeah, and again, this is the discussion I had with Pim. Silverstone and South Northamptonshire is the centre of England, and fantastic commuter links, motorways, train links, and clearly beautiful countryside. So why wouldn't you want to be?
And that's important because you spend. It's a great quality of life if you make your life around here, and that's one of the breaks or the changes I wanted to make. So I was born in São Paulo.
Yeah,
it's got about, last time I counted, I think it was about 20 million people.
Yes,
I spent 10 years in Asia, in cities with between 15 and 20 million people as well. The smallest place I've lived at before coming to England was Turin in Italy, which was 1.5. Just a village. and now I live in Buckingham, which is 5-6 miles away.
Yeah.
I could never actually count because I pay attention to the instruments, to the cluster in my car, because I'm always looking at the trees.
Yes.
When I drive through Stowe and etc. It's so nice so that I've never paid attention how long it is a drive. It's about 5 musics long.
5 tracks.
5 tracks long.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
5 songs long. But it's a great lifestyle. There's a lot to see, a lot of national trust. I'm a historian by hobby, so there's a lot to see and learn, and there's a lot of outdoors, a lot of cycling, and especially if you have young kids, that makes for great weekends.
Yeah.
People complain about the weather. I don't know. I haven't seen many clouds in the last 2 months or so. So
yeah, I think we've had a bit.
The weather seems pretty good.
We've had a bit of an anomaly. I think we started with 2 bouts of snow at the beginning of the year, and then we've had sort of 2 or 3 months of heat wave. But looking out the window now on Silverstone, there's obviously a bit of drizzle.
But we'll change in half an hour.
But it will change, yeah, for sure. And so you've very neatly moved this on to family and lifestyle, which is great. And so your background is sort of born and raised in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Yeah.
Was it football first or was it motorsport first? So was it the Brazilian football team or was it Senna? Or what came first, chicken or egg? Which?
It was cars.
Okay.
It's never really been about football.
Okay.
And I think because most of the country was crazy about football, I decided to be different. Another factor is when I obviously lived with my parents for quite a long time, and we had a house half a mile from what used to be the biggest private stadium in the world, which was the Morumbi Stadium belonging to the São Paulo Football Club.
Okay.
So every time there was a game, my life got disrupted,
Okay.
big time.
Lots of fans.
I couldn't leave home hours before the game and hours after the game. I had about a 90-minute window to leave home and get back home.
Yeah.
So maybe some of that actually shaped my. I like football. I'm not a big fan. I'm not a crazy fan. I don't follow. My son. So I think the genes actually skipped a generation. My 7-year-old is crazy about it, and it didn't come from me.
Okay.
So I don't know where that info
it's in
came
the blood.
from, but
it's got to be in the blood. So, but what we won't do today is talk about Neymar and all his rolling around during the World Cup. But we can certainly move it on. But from a sort of a tech and motorsport perspective, do you have an earliest memory of what sparked that? Is there anything that was the sort of genesis of, ultimately what you're now doing?
Well, for motorsport was basically Piquet, Senna, Carlos Paci, and others. And my father used to work for an automaker.
Okay.
And we would actually get tickets to the F1, to the Brazilian GP. So I've been several times to Rio and São Paulo to watch the races.
Fantastic.
So I think that's where the motorsport bug came around.
Yes.
But then it got transformed into actual, passenger vehicles and trucks and airplanes and anything that moves, not necessarily have to move fast. And yes, besides we are in a motorsport center of the world probably. But I'm as interested in efficiency, energy efficiency, as in speed. Maybe even more so in energy efficiency. I know it's less sexy, but it's more relevant to what I do.
Yeah.
But you can look at efficiency in terms of how can I go faster with the same amount of energy or same amount of money.
Yeah, yeah.
Or how can I actually make it more interesting to my
some of these electric cars can shift though, can't they? So it's not as if you're losing some of the speed.
No, not at all. On the contrary, I actually think we can make them faster. And some of the companies I'm involved with are actually actively working on making electric cars faster than petrol cars.
Okay.
And they are succeeding. We can also make them as much fun to drive around a track or a nice winding road as a conventional car.
Okay.
So electric doesn't mean boring. It's maybe slightly different fun, but the rush of speed you get as much as, if not even more. And you can actually involve the driver as well. So it doesn't have to be a video game sort-like experience. It can be a real. So there's many ways to do it, and we're working towards getting these products out there. So people can experience.
And the evolution of a driving experience, I think, is probably the sentiment there. So, and it's, as I said previously, it's very, very exciting. So back to sort of lifestyle and family. So came over to the UK 2 years ago with 2.5 years ago with your wife and your child. You mentioned before your son. So your son was born in Shanghai.
Seoul. He was born in Seoul.
Seoul.
He was actually conceived in Shanghai.
Okay.
But the got off the production line in Seoul.
Okay.
Then we moved back because we had a small child. We actually moved back to Brazil and stayed there for five years.
Okay.
And I think it was interesting to, for him to have a family or a wider family.
Of course.
But then we got the bug that we need to do something different and move again, and we decided to come over. I was commuting again to Shanghai quite often, and going to the UK was not only good for businesses because I could bring some of the businesses over to the UK as well, but it was much easier on me as well.
Of course.
And it cut more than half of my travel schedule.
Yeah.
And we liked it a lot. We were very welcome. We felt really welcome, and we all spoke English to some level of proficiency. The kid was already educated in English and Portuguese and German.
Okay.
In São Paulo.
So multilingual already and multicultural.
He had the easiest time of all.
Great.
So,
and presumably the plan is to obviously stay in Buckingham for the foreseeable future, to continue to grow AutoStrat in and around Silverstone and the UK, and for your young boy to obviously continue his education in the area, which is great. And as you said previously, the national trust sites and the culture around here is fantastic. Louise, my partner, and I also National Trust members, so we love going to Stowe. It's a fantastic place to go for an afternoon walk and a cup of coffee and just sort of chit.
We cycle there every weekend.
Do you really?
We cycle there. That we spend a few hours, usually once either Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah. Then
cycle back.
Yeah.
And then we go to other places on the second day of the weekend.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. And as I said, another reason why we've moved here. It's from a culture and a lifestyle change. It's a wonderful thing. But
the plan is, just to continue your question, the plan is to stay for the foreseeable future. I am learning a lot living in England.
Yes.
And I think I'm being able to help, companies and clients quite a bit. There's space for one more client at the moment. So otherwise, I'll have to start growing the company as well and getting more people.
And so for that one company that's potentially listening to this now, remind us again, because you mentioned at the very beginning, the value, the service, and how you could help that organisation.
Yeah, the small companies are very efficient in what they do. But one of the downsides is the owners or the executives have to be full-time focused on today, tomorrow, and next week. And a lot of times they have the intent and they feel the need that they need to create a second revenue stream on a different product line, or they have to expand into a different market with their current products or a derivative of those, or they actually want to make a plan on how can we make the company sustainable into the longer term future. And there's not a lot of time to think about that, and there's usually not a lot of experience in doing so. So what I can do is help them through a planning and a discovery process, and then getting a plan in place for execution. And what I'm finding right now, which is very interesting to me, because one of the goals was to spread the knowledge that I had, or at least that I feel that I have.
Sure.
And the second one was also to do something different. And so one of my clients, I've helped on the initial strategy side on how to funnel energy towards growth. And we had a strategy put in place. And then they asked me help to also implement the strategy. So I'm also doing some commercial development.
Okay.
So yes, you made the strategy, now execute it. Let's see if it actually works, right? So it's a great thing to do. You actually get to see things through, not only from a theoretical point of view, but also implement them in practice and tweak, and everything has to be flexible so you can actually learn and feed the cycle back and adjust.
And so how's that going at the moment as a project?
It's going very well.
Good.
It's going very well.
Okay, so great.
Very enjoyable, and we're having success.
Which is the main thing.
Yeah, after 4 or 5 months, we can already see some successes.
Good. One of the questions that I'm looking to ask all sort of business owners and thought leaders through the podcast is a question over mistakes and sort of lessons learned along the way, ones that potentially may have been pivotal to a learning piece and to potentially future success. Because we've all made mistakes, clearly, whether we want to admit it or not. And so the question I would ask you, if you're prepared to answer it, would be, what's your most embarrassing mistake, if you're prepared to share it? Ideally professionally, one where it enabled you to sort of take a step back, potentially maybe laugh and think, okay, that was a bit of a stupid thing to do, but actually the key learning from this is this, and this is how we're going to make sure this never happens again, as a sort of example. Do you have anything like that you could share with the listeners?
Well, I'm sure I had many embarrassing mistakes, though I believe I have a self-preservation mechanism, and my brain just purges that overnight. So I wake up with no recollection of any of the embarrassing ones. So I can make them again, without any problem.
Okay.
There's one that I regret.
Okay.
And then I can talk about that. It happened probably 9 years ago, and I was actually leading the product planning for a global OEM for a new global product line. And we were developing the architecture of a new family of mini vehicles to be sold in 120-something countries at the time. And already at that time, I had a vision that people would like to migrate towards a crossover, a mini crossover, even smaller than the ones we see today. And that would be really, really interesting in Asia, in Latin America, Mexico, and some countries of Africa, because you cannot afford to have a real full-blown crossover or SUV. You need affordability from a purchase perspective as well as from a ownership cost or operating costs. But you want to have that style, the lifestyle that it entails.
How it makes you feel.
Yes, you want to feel safe by riding higher up the road and etc. And I was entirely sure this was actually the right way to go. And maybe I was more self-conscious at the time, always moving to a different location, a different country, different people. And I think I didn't push that much.
Okay.
And I gave in too early. The writing was so easy to read for me, but I was not forceful enough. And I promised myself that if I believed in something really, really strongly, I would really not give up and try in different ways and over time and continue to go and try it. And I think that's one of the advices. If you're really sure about something, just because others can't see it right away, just keep on trying.
Persevere.
Persevere. Don't keep, knocking on the same door the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Try to find different ways to approach it.
Yeah.
And different people to approach it too.
Yeah.
Eventually, if you have even to bypass eventually some,
or even build your own door.
Some folks. So I think that's a good analogy. Build your own door.
So they come to it and open it.
And do what you believe in.
Yeah.
And if you're still sure, and that organization can see, maybe it's time to think about a change.
Sure, it's the same within my world as a financial planner. You can only help people that want to be helped and help today, theoretically. And if you have your philosophy, you need to make sure that you have one and that you believe it and that you can back it up and that you follow through with it. And so, can completely resonate with that. We're coming to the end of the interview. So again, John, thank you so much for coming on. It's been fascinating and fantastic conversation, and we'll certainly want to get you back on again in the future. Absolutely no doubt at all.
It'll be a pleasure.
Just to see how you're getting on with the existing projects and bringing sort of commercial entities into the UK and specifically Silverstone to try and help connect the dots, and also from your own growth perspective, new clients coming on board, etc. Another question that I'm really keen to ask all of my guests, purely because they're full of wisdom and insight and life experiences. What piece of advice could you give me, Chris Broome, as a business owner, financial planner, but more so sort of business owner, that you think could help me from the sort of experiences that you've had throughout your life?
Well, I think it's way easier to be successful doing whatever you want to do, if that's what you like.
Okay.
Because it helps you to go over the difficult times and gives you extra energy to wake up every morning and keep on doing something innovative, different, keeping pushing things forward in a meaningful way.
Okay.
It also means that your success criteria is not just how much money you make, because you're actually building a life and being happy while you do it. So it just makes it all broader, in perspective. And yes, some people especially the young ones. I remember many friends that graduated with me. They went directly into something which paid much more, but it was not really what they liked. And most of them didn't progress really well.
Okay.
And this is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yes.
Right? And it's a bad life if you have full pockets, but you're very unhappy about it all. And then when you look back, you said, well, you know what? I wish I did differently. So try to make your hobby your business activity if possible. Mm-hmm. But anyway, if not, at least work on something you're really passionate about, because you're most likely to succeed that way. And success will come, and however you categorize it, gradually, and you'll feel good about it. And this was a professional life worth living. I had the privilege of going to many places. I've mentioned before that I was a history buff, so my professional life actually allowed me to, meet and get to know different cultures, different locations, and etc. So, that was a plus. It's cars. It was all to do with cars, which was my passion anyway. So I managed to, so far, to get it done the way I wanted to do it, and I continue to do so. And it's great to be in England.
Practicing what you preach as well, which is great, and that's sage advice and wonderful. So thank you. My take out from that is find what you're passionate about, commit to it, ignore the noise, and just keep going. And as long as you're enjoying yourself, that in itself is success, and what else comes from that is just a bonus. Yeah, no,
it actually extends way into the personal life. I met my wife having a business argument.
Right. Okay.
And then we got married 3 weeks later.
There we are.
Right.
There we are.
That looks like it's the right way to go. So let's do it. True. And she's been with me all over the world ever since.
Bravo. True love always finds a way. Great. Jean, thank you so much for coming on. Within the show notes, I'll be putting AutoStrat's details and your contact information, so that if anybody wants to reach out to you, that there's an easy path for them to find you. And as I said, hopefully in due time we can bring you back on to see how AutoStrat's sort of progressing, but also to touch base on life again. National Trust, anything else that you're up to, so that those that listening and certainly those that don't live within the region can continue to learn about potentially why you should consider sort of partnering up with local firms in Silverstone Park, but also potentially consider moving to the region and being part of the extended family that is Silverstone.
Yeah, no, let's do it. And if anybody wants to get in touch and talk about the experience about moving into the Silverstone area, I'm happy to provide my feedback.
Great.
On a one-on-one basis, not
Great.
a problem.
Jean, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
Speak soon.
Yes, we'll speak to you soon, and everybody enjoy your day.
The Inside Silverstone podcast is produced by the team at Longhurst for the benefit of those with a passion for all things tech, engineering and innovation. For more information, please visit longhurst.co.uk/Inside Silverstone, whilst also remembering to give us a 5 out of 5 star rating on iTunes. Please note that neither Chris Broome or Longhurst work for Silverstone Park, Silverstone Circuit or Silverstone Technology Cluster.